Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Mandy Shoemaker, and I'm one of the founders of Well, past president, actually. Becky Alfred, who is in the audience there, wave, Becky, is the current president of Well and doing a fantastic job through the pandemic. We've really had some great success with some of these short programs just on Zoom that allow us really to access kind of a wide range of people and have an audience size that we don't have to worry about. And they've been really successful. So tonight we are really excited to have Allan Katz here with us. Allan is the founder of American Public Square, which is how I'm familiar with him. He is Allan Katz. He was appointed as U.S. Ambassador to Portugal by President Obama in 2013 and has dedicated his life to public service, social advocacy, and community engagement. A lawyer and political science professor at William Jewell College, Allan founded American Public Square in 2013, where he serves as CEO and chair of the board of directors. American Public Square is a not-for-profit organization that convenes non-like-minded people to engage in civil, fact-based discourse about the challenging issues facing society today. Which, whoa, that's a feat in times, I think. I mean, you know, more than ever, especially after these last couple of weeks. And so we're thrilled to have you with us and to kind of embark on a little journey tonight on how we can be more civil, have a little more civility in our own lives, and set a good example for our own kids. The mission of Well is to educate and support families as they navigate mental health and wellness with their children. And the uncivil climate is directly impacting my mental health. And I know I'm not alone as an adult or young adults, teens, kids. So with that, if we can go ahead and get started, Allan, if you wouldn't start by telling us why you are passionate about civility, what it means, why it's important in today's day and age. I think it's fairly obvious, but I'm sure you'll have a great explanation for us.
Well, thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I think from what I've read, that you all are doing very important work. And as far as the issue of civility in our society, we obviously know how bad things have become. I started doing this work actually when I lived in Tallahassee, Florida, where I was a city commissioner, and there was a big fight over a coal plant because the city owned the utility. And the question was, were we going to buy some of the power from the coal plant in the adjacent county? And it was a community that basically had been pretty nice. People got along pretty well. It was, and what came out of this was a huge, nasty fight in the community. And when it was over with, someone came to me and said, we really need to figure out a way to get people to come together and be able to sort of have fact-based and civil conversations, because otherwise things are going to continue to deteriorate. And so what we did is we put together a group of people and I said, the way we have to do this, we have to make sure that it's bipartisan. If we call it nonpartisan, no one will believe us. So I was the Democrat, and a friend of mine who was president of the community college was a Republican. We were the co-chairs, and we put together a board. And the idea was we're going to have a series of programs in the community about different things. And we originally had nothing but dinners. So basically it cost you $25 and you came to the dinner, and we would have a program. And the person that came to me with the idea, and I said I would put the board together and I would find the money to get started, but she had to run it. And she kept telling me what a great idea it was. And I said, well, it sounds really good, but who cares about this? And so we went to the first dinner that was held, and I walked into the room. It was held at a church. And now Tallahassee, Florida is a town of maybe 250,000 people. And when you're a city commissioner there, you know everyone. Well, you know the usual suspects, the people who show up at everything. And I remember walking into the room, looking around and going to the woman, Liz Joyner, and I said, Liz, who in the hell are these people? I've never seen most of them ever before. And she said, these are the people out there who really are just dying for an opportunity to be part of something that is not, a food fight. And so from that, I did that for a few years, and it's still going, by the way, in Tallahassee. And when I left to become ambassador to Portugal in 2010, it went well. I came back to Kansas City after my time in Portugal, and it was offered a position at UMKC. And Leo Morton, then the chancellor, said to me, "What is it that you want to do here?" And I told him about what was the Village Square, and I said, "I think we could do something like that here." I said, "But I said, because it's a big site, but it's a big city, and it hasn't been done in a big city before." And so I got very lucky along the way. Someone introduced me to Tom Block, who introduced me to his wife, Mary, and I sat down with Mary, and she thought it was a good idea. And I said, "But I need to find a Republican, Mary." So she took me to Peggy Dunn. And so Peggy would have never done it for me, did it because Mary was there. And I said, "Oh, good, I now have two co-chairs, but I don't know anyone in town, so we need to get a board." So they helped me recruit a board, and it all kind of worked from there. The basic notion of this whole concept really is being able to engage in a conversation with someone with whom you disagree without being terribly disagreeable. It doesn't mean you can't be passionate about what you believe in. It doesn't mean that you can't really seriously disagree with people. But I grew up at a time, and again, I'm older than anyone on this call, I'm confident of that, when my parents and their friends could really argue about politics, and then they all get together, they go out to dinner together. And that basically it didn't undermine the friendship. It didn't change things at family gatherings. It was, I remember I had an uncle who used to hand out communist pamphlets at family occasions, and everyone just kind of chuckled. It was Uncle Otto, and that was just the way it was. So all I'm saying is that there was a time in this country where people could seriously disagree without things becoming as toxic as they are today. And I would sort of say that probably the most significant thing to begin with is to recognize that it's always a mistake to question the motives of people with whom we disagree. We may disagree, and Joe Biden tells the great story, which maybe you've all heard about. He was a young senator, and they were debating the Americans with Disabilities Act on the floor of the U.S. Senate. And Jesse Helms, the very conservative senator from North Carolina, was railing against why they shouldn't pass this. And Biden was called into Mike Mansfield, who was a majority leader's office at the time, and he said, and Biden said, "I told Mansfield this, but Jesse Helms doesn't care about people with disabilities. I can't believe he's out there trying to fight this bill." And Mansfield looked at him and he said, "Did you know that he and his wife adopted a disabled child last year?" And Biden said, that was the lesson. I think the lesson for all of us is there are people with whom we disagree. We may think that they have made a terrible analysis. We may think they don't have enough facts, but it's the motives. It's questioning the motives of each other that make things really toxic. And so I guess to me the sort of the starting point of all this is accept the fact that you can disagree with someone else, and just because they don't agree with you, it's always a mistake to attribute the basest motives to why they're on the other side. Now, you may find out over time that would have been a correct assumption, but the point is that it's always a mistake to start there, because you never get any farther. One final thing I would say about this, and then we can start. I'm happy to answer any questions, if this has even answered your question. And that is that I think that when you know someone with whom you disagree and you go to sit down with them, if your goal is to convince them that you're right and they're wrong, I would generally describe that as a fool's errand, that it's not going to happen, and therefore it's better even not to have the conversation. Now, I would put that differently when it comes to parents and children, because having raised two boys myself, I was less concerned with their opinion than I think modern parlance may be with you all with your children. But nonetheless, the reality is that I think that you need to recognize the fact that most of us share common values. We may express them differently. We may look at a number of things differently, but there's something that in common we often have, and it really would be beneficial to sort of start by finding out what that is.
Sure. What about, so I was thinking the same thing, that nowadays it seems like our goal is that we have to convince someone. You know, your goal is to convince them that they are wrong. So instead of entering into conversations with that goal, what should the goal be?
Well, I think the goal should be is that, first of all, is there anything you agree about? You know, and chances are there's something.
Right.
And it may well be. And the other thing too that's so interesting, you know, one of the things we do at American Public Square is we have real-time fact checkers at our events. And someone once told me there's no one who stakes out a position that they don't think the facts support that position. No one says, oh, I know the facts are on the other side, but I believe this anyway. Now, you may question what they consider facts, but what I'm saying, and they may question what you consider facts, but the reality is, and the problem is, which made the situation worse in our country, is that there used to be certain institutions that were sort of commonly accepted as sort of, you know, factual. There was a common well of facts, is the way I describe it. And from this common well of facts, people could draw starkly different conclusions as to the right way forward. But we weren't arguing about whether or not the sky was blue. You know, that's what you were talking about. And then you could argue about what that meant in terms of weather patterns. But today we seem to have, you know, lost faith. And I think one of the more destructive things that's happened in recent years is the tearing down of all institutional norms, or better still, more so even politicizing all of what in the past were, okay, you always had probably a liberal bias among the mainstream media, but it wasn't an overwhelming bias. In fact, if you look back through probably until the early 21st century, Republican candidates for president virtually always got maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the newspaper endorsements. Now that comes as a huge surprise to a lot of people, but it's actually a fact. It's kind of like when Barack Obama won against John McCain and then won against Mitt Romney, he carried less than 1/3 of all of the counties in the United States. So what happens is that these are just things that are out there, and they're important to know because it helps you understand why people have such wildly different views of the same thing.
So here's a question as our BB group was preparing for our conversation with you, a question that came up that does fall along these lines. And I think it's interesting, especially right now. How do you have a civil conversation with someone who is using alternative facts that they have accepted as truth, despite evidence disputing it? You know, I feel like we've sort of lost the ability to agree to disagree. But when, you know, so what do you know, if you do have conversations with people on both sides a lot, and how do you take a conversation that's, you know, where you can feel your blood boiling? How do you rein it in?
What I try to do, not always successfully, by the way, but what I try to do is, I mean, I'll give you an example. I have a friend who's a Republican who said to me, he doesn't believe any of the polls. And I said, so why don't you believe the polls, Jim? He says, well, because I've never been called for a poll, and I'm sure that they're only calling Democrats for these polls. And what I wanted to say was, well, your chance of being called for a poll is like being struck by lightning, given the fact that we have 320 million Americans. But instead, I try to sort of say, okay, I understand what you're saying, but I've never been called for a poll either, and I'm a Democrat. So maybe that's not exactly that shouldn't necessarily be the definitive reason why you shouldn't believe in polls. You may want to, there may be other reasons. That's probably not the best one. And to me, the argument, it's sort of like, you know, I'm not sort of saying, well, internally I might be saying, you idiot. Of course you haven't been called by a poll. No, I don't think anyway. You know, most people I know have never been called about a poll, about a real poll. But it's a question really of sort of trying to get them to sort of take a fact or to sort of say, you know, I understand that you think that's true. I'm not sure that that's exactly right. why don't we, where do you think would be a good place for us to go and figure out exactly what's right on that? I mean, look, is it like,
Sure.
is it, do we want to Google it? Do we want to go to the encyclopedia when they used to have encyclopedias? Things like, are there places that we can go and let them sort of talk? And because a lot of the time what it winds up with, and by the way, this is by no means the province only of the right. I mean, the left is, and all my liberal friends, and I put myself in that category, personally, they drive me crazier than the people on the right do, because I read it, or did you see what Rachel said, or did you see what so-and-so, or so-and-so I heard, and suddenly it is a fact. And the reality is, well, not exactly, okay? And I think that it's hard for all of us to, particularly when it sort of meshes into sort of what our, our normal bias is anyway. And of course, the other problem really is that we have a tendency to only read those things with which we agree. Watch television stations with whom which have policy with which we agree. Go to websites that reinforce all of our biases. And I think that so what I would, and for example, if I had a friend who was, adamant about one thing or another, I would say, okay, I'm going to make a deal with you. For the next week, I will watch Fox News from 9 to 10, and you watch MSNBC from 9 to 10, and then let's get back together and talk about this. Or something. In other words, there are a lot of ways to do this which don't mean that you have to. And the other thing is that I think there's a lot less value than I thought when I was younger in proving that I was right. Because, the point is this, is when you take someone's face and you rub it in to their mistake, you think they come out of that liking you more or feeling better about the situation or better about you? Actually, what happens is it just raises the resentment level. So my sense is, everybody just needs to kind of like take it down a notch. And believe me, in this current environment, I know how hard it is. I know what it's like in my house. I've stopped, I watch very little news anymore. And I've stopped discussing this certainly with my children, because they're just like, their heads are exploding with everything that's going on. So it doesn't really help me have the conversation with them, other than the fact to sort of say, there are people on the other side who actually are good and decent human beings, but they've reached a different conclusion in terms of what their priority is in terms of what's important.
That line that you just said, I think is a keeper. Becky, can we make a graphic for that and put it on our website, on our Facebook page, that, really, what is the value in proving that you're right? Like, what does that get you? I was right. There's probably so much more loss that happens from that conversation than to end up right.
No, I think that's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that we all, the problem is that most of our political leaders, sadly, elected officials, are engaged in rhetoric which is aimed at the most fervent supporters of their side. And as a result, we lose a lot, because, the failure to sort of adhere to a certain narrative about how bad the other side is oftentimes viewed as a lack of, intestinal fortitude or willpower or whatever it may happen to be. The moment there's a political reward in being rational and balancing things off, that's when it'll start happening. Right now, the only reward is on the extremes. It's like, how much can you hate Donald Trump? I've got 7 terrible things I can say about Donald Trump. I've got 9 terrible things I can say about Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. And so what happens is that's what keeps people sort of jazzed up. And if you're an elected official and I'm going to run against you and you're not adhering to that, I'm running to that base of saying, see, he or she, they don't hate those people as much as I do. Well, one other thing I'd just like to throw out there. I think that when you're looking at President Trump and his ability to keep the base that he's been able to keep, part of that is he's been very successful in antagonizing the people that a lot of his base think are, look down their noses at them. So President Trump can do something that outrages, that will get an automatic hand-wringing outrage response from the media and from the Democrats, and that reinforces with his supporters that he's their guy.
Yeah, I think that, oh, I know what I was going to say. So I think let's talk about how this impacts our students. And I want to take, I did get a good question here that I'll take in just a minute. But so after the vice presidential debate last night, President Trump had, tweeted about Kamala Harris being a monster. And I think, you're right. There's this, and I think there is this environment of the more charged it is, the more awful, things that are said on any side about anyone that's what makes it to the news. That's what, everybody's vying for somebody's attention, I guess just the media's attention. How do we help our children not pick up those horrible habits? I think that are so modeled for them everywhere they turn. And I know this isn't necessarily on civility, but looking at how do we have those conversations with our kids about what's wrong with this picture, and what kind of control what kind of things we have control over.
Okay, well, first of all, let me start at the macro level and then move down. Larger sense, one of the reasons that I do what I do, people have asked me about this, is because I want my children and my grandchildren to understand that this isn't the only way government and politics works. And because in their life, that's all they've seen. Okay, they've seen nothing but this. So part of what we need to do with our kids is not only do we need to create some other models that they can see now, but frankly, when I went to UMKC to teach, I was appalled at the lack of knowledge, just basic historic civic knowledge that these students had. I mean, they didn't know who anyone was. They didn't know that anything had happened before probably, 9/11. Anything else that happened back then was sort of the dark ages, and they didn't think it related to them in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's been a huge failing of our schools to not take civics more seriously, to not make kids understand. And there are countless examples. You can take examples. You can look at, I was teaching a class the other day, and we were talking about the election of 1960, a very close election, where Richard Nixon, who later became, a chief villain in many places, he's up there conceding the election to Senator Kennedy in a way that he didn't need to, at a time that he didn't need to, but believed that for the country, that's what you needed to do, okay? And Al Gore in 2000 did the same thing in terms of the Supreme Court system. So, I mean, there are examples out there of people actually behaving well in difficult circumstances. And I think it'd be good for our kids to understand that what they're seeing right now is an aberration. It's an anomaly. It's not what it was. And again, the other thing that's important for us to remember about our kids is, your kids, because my kids are grown, but basically that the only presidents that they really remember were Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Maybe George W. Bush, but depends on how old they are. But the point is, therefore, number one, having a black president is not viewed as so odd, right? Because after all, for half their lives, they had a black president. And so that's not seen as anything that odd. And then we have Donald Trump, and basically, is that the way people behave? And I guess what I'm saying is that I really think there's an educational component here for our kids, that they basically can see that this is not the way things need to be. And I think that and then there are countless examples in everyday life that you all encounter as parents, okay? I don't have to tell you what they are. Basically, people do things, say things, social media, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I have a son who is now a professor at Berkeley, but he was clearly bullied as a young boy at school. We didn't use those terms then because it wasn't physical, okay? But and he was an odd kid in that he didn't have a lot of friends, and he was treated very badly by some of the other kids. We moved him into a different school, and things worked out better. But the point was, we were unaware of it, but there was no social media. We didn't have that, okay? So the absence of social media put more things within our control as parents. Mm-hmm. And you now realize, as parents, that you don't have that much control because of social media, unless you interject yourself rather dramatically into what you allow your children to do. Now, I've always believed that, if you ask my kids today as grown adults with their own children, what the mantra they remember the most from growing up was, we're the parents, you're the kids, that's the deal, okay? And therefore, life really kind of built itself around that. Look, not in every case and all those kinds of things, but that was the basic structure that there were consequences for deviating from the behavior that had been prescribed. I still think it's possible. I think that kids like structure. I think kids generally want their parents to approve of them, not in all cases. And I have a grandson that's on the autism scale. I understand how these things are, can be much more complicated. But I also think that by and large, as parents, our job really is to kind of like make sure our kids understand what's not only right and wrong, but what's normal and what's abnormal. Yeah. And basically to intervene and sort of say, this is abnormal. You have this friend, and what he does when he comes over here, he plays with a knife all the time, or he plays with a gun all the time, or he smokes, whatever. You're not going to be playing with Joey anymore. And your son or daughter won't like that, and they'll be mad at you. And you know what? They're probably better off not playing with Joey. And which I go to again, because what you're really doing is this. You're announcing there are certain types of behavior, there's certain type of interaction that is unacceptable. And that all leads into this question of civil discourse. In other words, how do you treat other people? And it's not a question of how you treat other people, but how you allow other people to treat you.
Let's talk a little bit more about social media. And I think that there's a couple things that I want to touch on. I think one of them you talked about a little bit already, in terms of, that we only see things that that our feed is so honed to only agree with things to only see the things that we agree with. And I have to say, I have put a 30-day block on a lot of people lately just because I don't want to get fired up when I'm looking at those things. And so I think the specific question that we have is, what are your recommendations about conversations on social media, and how has social media impacted your work around civility?
Okay, first of all, social media is a huge problem, I believe, societally, because it has essentially become very tribal. In other words, you go on and you either agree with something you see something you agree with and you sort of say, you give a thumbs up or yes, I agree, or you see something you don't agree with and you do something really snarky. Very rarely do you see sort of thoughtful interchanges going back and forth among people who disagree with each other. And one of the things that really we are trying, and I would say to date unsuccessfully, to figure out is a way to turn social media into a positive force within civil discourse between people. It's very difficult because it is, not only is it unfiltered, you have access by people who are not interested in things being civil. And so the question is, how can you create some kind of a way to sort of keep the crazy people out? And people say to me, well, what do you do with people who are on the extremes, who only want to scream and shout how right they are? I say, well, I don't talk to them. Right. And they say, what about American Public Square? I said, they're not really welcome. Everyone else is welcome. But people who want to all they want to do is sort of scream that they're right and make fun of or deride other people, they're just not welcome. And I think that to some degree, we need to figure out a way to do that. As you say, you can put a block on people for 30 days. There's certain people we can all unfriend, or we can sort of block. And, but I think that, but the point is, social media is not going away. It's not like, okay, this is a terrible scourge, and it's not like the coronavirus. So I think that what's going to happen is we're going to have to learn how to deal with this. And I will tell you, it is one of the great challenges to those of us who are trying to sort of create a different tone of conversation, because there are a lot of people who don't even talk anymore. I'm one of those people, as Allan can tell you, sort of a chronic telephoner. I don't sit down there and send emails there. When I pick up the phone, I call people. And I realize that, it intrudes on their life in certain ways when I call them on the phone. But to me, it's much more of an interaction that I think is going to be, meaningful. I think that it's much easier to be unpleasant remotely. It's very difficult. And I would encourage all of you to try this if you haven't, is you think of someone that you think has really behaved badly, to go, when we ever reach a point where you can actually sit down with someone again, which we're not there yet, but I mean, to sit down in the same room, look them in the eye and tell them what they've done wrong is much harder. And by the way, if you do it correctly, it's much more productive, because the reality is that you have an opportunity to clear the air in a way where basically both people can see it, not from there's a better chance you can see it from the other person's perspective. When you send an email telling them how pissed off you are, that's probably not going to endear you to anyone. You may be perfectly right and justified in doing it. But if you're looking for a more civil interchange, that's not the way to do it.
So I'm sure most people on the call tonight are familiar with Brene Brown, who's a researcher out of Houston. And she wrote a book a few years ago called Braving the Wilderness. And one of the main points in the book is she talks about tribalism, and that you can't hate people up close. That when you actually know someone, no matter what their beliefs are, it's much harder to hate them. And just a plug for American Public Square, I read the book a few years ago, and I've been, a member of American Public Square for the last few years. And when I was reading that book, I wanted to shout, "It's happening here! It's American Public Square!" Because I really do think, and for those of you who didn't necessarily hear, in normal times, American Public Square is about sharing a meal with people and having conversation with people with whom you may likely disagree. And it's very encouraged to sit with people that you don't know, to sit with someone that you might not agree with. And I think we are very lucky in this community to have several, programs that are like that. Church of the Resurrection has Allies for Racial Justice. And anyway, so I think in terms of I'm answering some of these own questions, but in terms of what we can do for civility, just as you're talking, I'm thinking, the best thing we can do is participate in these kinds of programs, and show our kids that it's important to know to have a diverse group of friends and know a wide range of people that have differing beliefs.
No, I think that's right. I think that there are a couple things. First of all, I think one of the things that we can show our kids, and I have, it took me a while to be able to do this or to think it through, and that is, find someone that you don't agree with. Find someone who's not like you. Find someone who has a different perspective, but that you have met in one iteration or another, and befriend them. And let your kids know you're befriending them, and let your kids know that, listen, Joe over here, he's voting for Trump, but what a good guy he is, because he comes over here. In other words, what you're doing is you're sort of separating out what one is from the other. And I think that's important in terms of leading by example, because it's easy. Look, we lecture our kids all the time. We tell them do this, don't do that all the time. But when we actually do it ourselves, what happens is, I mean, how can our kids, we want to help the less fortunate. They see us doing things, you know, whether it's volunteering or giving money, whatever it may happen to be. This is no different. It really isn't. The other thing that I think is important to understand is there's another book that actually sort of formed the underpinnings of American Public Square called The Righteous Mind by a guy named Jonathan Haidt, and spelled H-A-I-D-T. And Jonathan came to actually the Village Square in Tallahassee when we started, and he said, this is what I'm talking about. And his argument essentially is that good people disagree about politics and religion because essentially most people don't reach the conclusions they reached by going through a logical process. They go through an intuitive and an emotional process. And the example he always uses is the elephants and the riders. Okay, the elephants are really your emotions, your intuition, your instinct about different things, how you were raised, etc. And the riders are your rational mind. And the rational mind's only job is to explain why the elephant's either leaning left or leaning right. And we spend a lot of our time yelling at the rider saying, no, you got to redirect the elephant. You got to do something like that. The fact of the matter is that, and he has a bunch of interesting examples about how we don't come to rational decisions. What we wind up doing is we sort of react intuitively and instinctively. Probably the quickest and easiest example I can give you is the family dog went over, you bring the dog in, you clean the dog up, you cook the dog for dinner, and it's served for dinner. Now, is this morally right or wrong? And, you know, rationally, the dog was dead anyway. It was cooked properly, but we are all kind of repelled by the idea, right? Well, that's not a rational response, is it? That's an emotional and an intuitive response. And what he would say is there are a whole bunch of those things that really affect our responses. And so what we need to do, not just ours, but somebody else's too.
Yeah.
And the only way is if you understand that that's the reason people are like that. I use the other example of, I have friends who say to me, how can these people who are lower middle class people support Trump? Because after all, he's not doing anything for them. And I say, so how can these upper class people who are going to pay more in taxes support a Democrat when he's going to take more of their money? And the answer is a simple one. It's cultural, okay? Cultural trumps that. Well, why? It trumps it for well-off people. Why would you think it wouldn't trump for less well-off people? Doesn't make them racist, doesn't make them terrible people. It just means that culturally, whether it's an issue of attendance or whatever it may happen to, that believes that the people who have more and are more liberal look down on them as ignorant people. And you know what? They're right. Sadly to say, they're right. Not in all cases, not everybody, but that's real. And you know what? You have a tendency not to really want to agree with people who look down on you. And so all I'm saying with all this, we just need to be cognizant of the fact, and even if we don't individually, what we need to realize is that means we have to do something proactively to demonstrate that. And that is, so find someone, find it. What I would say to you, if you're a Republican, find a Democratic friend. If you're a Democrat, find a Republican friend, and learn to be able to sit down there. You can argue, you can laugh, you can and then have a glass of wine together. And what you've learned is, okay, they have a point of view, and they're not a different point of view, but they're not a bad person. They're a good person. And so therefore, you know, all this to me is, it's like most things in life. It sort of has to have a ripple effect. And I can only do what I can do in the community that I'm living in. And you all can only do what you do within the community you live in. But, you know, there are a lot of people in the United States, there are lots of organizations around the United States who are trying different iterations of this. So my message there would be, we are not alone, okay? There are large number of organizations that, however ineptly we may be doing it, we're trying because we've recognized the value of it. And I think that hopefully the day is not too far away when this can be seen as a movement in this country, and a movement that has some momentum and and once it achieves political viability. In other words, if we're unwilling to vote for someone who is going to stake out extreme positions, even though they're in our party, then what's going to happen is things are going to change. But it's all of us. I mean, it really is.
Well, I think that's all. I mean, it's given me a kind of a fresh, I can go out tomorrow with a little bit of a fresh perspective in how I greet my neighbors and people who have differences. Some of my favorite relationships are with people that do have different beliefs that I can have these incredible, intense conversations with. And then, you know, it just brings us closer, really. And even when we disagree, which is just important. But I want to bring it, I'd like to close tonight. I think we don't want to go too long, but we had a question from one of our BB Well members, Laura, and it pertains to just the current climate here in Blue Valley and how things have gone with parents who disagree with the decisions the school board has made and how those things were handled. Laura, would you mind asking your question?
You asked my question already that I sent.
I didn't ask that specific question.
Mandy, this is Kristen. It was me.
It was you, Kristen.
It was me.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
Would you ask the question? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. I just think that what our kids saw over the last, couple of months, specifically as decisions were being made, that obviously, sent families into turmoil, and I'm sure that's where a lot of it was coming from, fear and trying to figure out how am I going to manage my kids being home or being hybrid, or are they going to get to play sports or not get to play sports, and their own concern of mental health. But the way it came across was really, I think, really ugly. Things being said about people that had no choice in decisions that were being made, teachers and, quite frankly, administrators that had no choices. They were just, trying to all figure it out. But just the approach that was taken in how to convey, I think, just really got ugly. So obviously there's probably going to be more decisions like this that need to be made and, over the next few months. And how do we frame those kinds of conversations better? Especially, for modeling for our kids, on, how do rational adults come together and try and make these very difficult decisions?
And I think setting the stage for a forum for this conversation to happen, and in this case, it was around sports and being in school and, at the public forum of board meetings and on social media and all that kind of stuff. But
yeah. Let me just, I remember I got pretty unfortunate for a lot of folks. Let me just sort of say this. I think where people like this group can be really terribly helpful. Let's forget what your individual position is on whether you should have sports or not have sports, whatever, school or shouldn't be in school. That people are struggling to make the best decision. They're not out to get anybody. They're not out to do anything bad to anybody. The people responsible for making these decisions are trying to make a good decision. Doesn't mean, by the way, that they'll make the right decision, okay? But the first thing I said, let's not question their motives. Let's assume that they are not trying to make it more difficult for parents to have to go to work and then do with their kids in terms of being at home, et cetera. And I think that what happens here is that I think a process of, in other words, if the decision that's made is one with which a large number of parents disagree, then it seems to me that being able to have something resembling a public conversation about it would be very helpful. Standing up and shouting into a microphone at people sitting at the head, sitting at a table up there and having to kind of, it's really not what they signed up for, you know? I mean, they're trying to do a job and they're trying to do it the best way they can do it. And it may be that, you know, it would test it, okay? I don't care who we are. This period of time has been so fraught. And if you're not just responsible for your own family, but some institution and how it is, no one is doing it without an enormous amount of concern for what the impact of their decision is going to be. And I think the more parents that can sort of say, okay, we disagree, we agree with you, we don't think this is the right way to do things, but let's figure out a way to try to bring together an argument and sit down with these people in a way where we're not sort of saying to them, you're stupid, you don't care about us, whatever it may happen to be. And it really, in some ways, it's better if parents who don't agree with the decision are leading that. Because it's not a question of my side won, your side won. It's a question of, you know, we really, and that's the way I think you sort of take the temperature down. Let people know that, okay, everyone's doing their best here. If that's the starting point, everyone's doing their best to make this work out for our students and for our school district and for the parents and all of the different health concerns, both the mental health at home and the physical health of COVID, then people can begin to sort of start figuring, okay, what are some alternatives? How can we possibly work it out? But if the notion is, how can you do this because you're creating a problem for me? You know, I don't think that the likelihood of success is very high. So I would say that, you know, this group could take the lead on whatever comes next and attempt to sort of say, okay, we understand that everyone's trying to do their best here. And let's figure out a way to be able to sort of, because if someone wants to do something different or believes that it's the wrong thing to do, it would be helpful if they would acknowledge the concerns that have been expressed as to why a decision was made and come up with some suggestions on an alternate way of doing it. And not just dismiss the concerns as if they don't matter, because obviously they matter, or that decision wouldn't have been made that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully we don't have to go back to square one.
That would be good.
I do think we've made progress in the last few weeks. So I just, you know, me personally, what I'm walking away with tonight is just what is the value in me being right. I think those are, it's just so important for people to remember. And then find what we have in common. That when we are having those challenging conversations, that we focus more on what we have in common than what those differences are. So I think those are my big takeaways. And not that I, you know, didn't ever know those things, but I certainly haven't been applying them to my conversations lately in a way that is probably the most helpful. So do you have any parting words for us?
Well, just with what I think what I started with, which is, it is all with whom you disagree. Most of the time people don't. And if you recognize that, then you're starting with a common well of values, okay? Of what you think is important. And from there, you can then start talking about what should and shouldn't be done. If you think that someone has different values than you, they don't care about people, they don't, you know, they're bigots or whatever they may happen to be, it's very difficult to get very far. So you have to give people the opportunity to, and you yourself have to be cognizant of the fact of how you sound to someone else. Because a lot of times I find myself pulling myself back because I can feel myself going in a direction and I think, oh, no, I don't want to go there because what I'm going to do is I'm going to lose this person. And we all have, and sometimes even when I've been antagonized because I thought were over the top, I found that responding in kind does nothing to make things any better, nor does it change any mind.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, for those of you, I'll give a little, I know Allan isn't here just to plug American Public Square, but I will say that there is a wonderful event next Tuesday that's a fundraiser for American Public Square, where Alana, if you'll wave Alana, she is one of the leaders of American Public Square, and it will be a panel conversation with some of the founders from the Lincoln Project. So if you're interested in, I'm hosting a watch party for it. So if you're interested, it's worth checking out. It's just a lot more of this kind of conversation and being able to see it in action. And I do think that, you know, it's just it's sad that we have to create the situations in which we can model this to happen, but so important that it is happening right here in our community. I think we're very lucky. So we appreciate everything you're doing for civility, and we'll look forward to watching what happens in the future. So.
Very nice to be here, and I hope to see all of you in person maybe next year at an American Public Square event, assuming we ever have one in person again. And meanwhile, I would urge everyone, please, stay as much as you can, and we will get it now. I wonder whether we will really get through it, but so be well, and it's very important. You know,
all right. Thanks so much, everybody. All right. So, and we do have a recording, so we'll make this available if you have any, you know, family members that you might like to share it with. I think it's great content that we can all use about now. So everybody have a great night, and we'll hopefully see you real soon.